Hey, Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel. And I am super excited today to have a special guest with me. This is Andrea Dejean, and we are here to talk about her book, Sphinx, which her publisher very kindly sent me, and I was very, very happy to read it. And anyone who's been around my channel long enough knows that I am a nerd when I read, and this was quite a nerdy book, and I liked that about it. You have a bibliography in the back that's something I haven't seen yet, and I loved that. So, yes, could you please give us a little bit of background on you and how you started writing and your beautiful book?
Okay, well, I've always written ever since I can remember. It's something that I've always wanted to do. Like a lot of people who write, I'm a reader and read a lot as a young woman, as a child. It's always been reading and writing a way that I've kind of tried to figure out my place in the world and figure out things about the world. So writing has always been a part of my life. And at some point wanted to write and publish novels. So that's a little bit about me.
Lovely. And maybe a spoiler-free summary of what Sphinx is for people who don't know.
Sphinx is the story of a young woman who's doing doctoral studies in a university in the United States and goes off to French Guiana to do some field work in applied anthropology, especially looking at the use of medicinal plants by some of the local populations. And she negotiates before leaving with one of the professors at the university who studies sphinx moths or hawk moths to harvest a certain number of moths every month and send them back to him because he can't get into the field like a lot of scientists. In exchange, she will earn a small stipend, and that will help her to pay for some of her necessities. And as the story begins, she's in the field and she's not a scientist, but she is an anthropologist. And she starts kind of taking an informal inventory of the moths that land on her light trap. She knows about them. Her grandfather had been an amateur lepidopterist. She'd been to light traps before. And she notices that there are some species coming to her light trap that are usually species that are indicative of an environment that is degraded. And this surprises her because she's in the middle of the forest. But she's not really sure if what she's seeing is correct. It's true that her collecting site runs alongside a concession, a legal gold mining concession, but starts questioning what she's seeing at her trap. As the story continues and she's leaving her collection site, she begins to wonder if someone's not taking pot shots at her in the forest. And this is another thing that she finds odd. So she shares this with her small group of very disparate friends who also wonder if they can believe her. She's got a bit of a checkered past. She has some issues. She's not particularly trustworthy. As she says herself, she's not sure she can trust herself. But the upside is that these incidents of when she thinks someone's shooting at her makes her focus on something other than herself. And she starts wondering maybe what's going on. And it allows her to understand that she needs to pay more attention to some of the environmental and human impact, that's being caused not only by gold mining, but often by gold mining, including legal as well as illegal gold mining. So in kind of a harebrained scheme to try and redeem herself with her friends and even kind of get back some self-esteem, she decides that she's going to launch a plan to get the gold mining concession to close down.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of it's an interesting mix of action and suspense and mystery and nerdiness, which I enjoyed.
I'm not really a nerd. I'm not a scientist. I'm a pure literary person. So I appreciate the nerdiness. that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Well, you said you were yourself in this area of the world, and you were there with your husband, who is a nerd, right?
Yes, he's a nerd. He's an entomologist.
Yeah, excellent.
So,
And the reason that when I read it, obviously I was very happy to read it, and I was going to include it in one of my book reviews, reading wrap-ups anyway. And then I just thought it would be so interesting to talk to you about this, because the book kind of revolves around, as you said, these Sphinx moths being bioindicators. And that's which means that the way that this species is presenting or behaving tells you something about the environment. So as you said, it being in a certain place is indicative of degradation. And bioindicators are something that is so fascinating to me. I just picked up on that little thread, and I thought it would be super fun to talk about. Where did the inspiration to write this book come from?
when we used to go to French Guiana for many years, we were very graciously hosted by an environmental laboratory there on site. And they hosted a number of scientists from around the world. I was kind of a hanger-on, but in the forest. The director at that time, who unfortunately has since passed away, loved Sphinx moths. He studied a lot of things, but he was really particularly fascinated by Sphinx moths. He had collections that he would take to the schools and try to talk to people about them. And at one point, one of the things I used to do to try to be useful was to do some translating and editing of scientific texts. Most of the people I know in my circle are French speaking. And as you know, you need to publish in English for the most part. And he had done an inventory in a different part of French Guiana on Sphinx moths that he was going to publish in French, but he needed the abstract translated. And in that abstract, he brought up the idea of bioindicators. And I thought, this is fascinating. And being a writer, I thought this would make a great story. So that was the original impetus for it. And I remember while I was doing the work for him, I thought, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it did make for a great story. And you can weave that into a lot of different plots. And the conflict in the book that you mentioned with this with the gold mining, that's not entirely fictional, is it? It's you've written in here in your bibliographic notes, if I can find it. Oh no. I had marked something that I wanted to talk about. The gold mining. The mining. Oh, there it is. Yeah. The role of Sphinx moths as bioindicators, as well as the problems facing indigenous peoples along the rivers of French Guiana as a result of high levels of mercury in the fish they catch and consume. So that's the conflict is real, and it's present, and it's something that people are researching, right?
Right. Well, when I first started talking to people at the laboratory in French Guiana, it was in the late 90s. And Philippe Cerdin, who was the director at the time, along with this whole team, they were doing a lot of studies in the field on the impact. A hydroelectric dam had just been built, and they were called in to do studies on the quality of the water and the fauna and the flora, but mostly the water, to see what the impact of the gold mining was on it. Because as you know, most of the illegal and possibly legal concessions use mercury to amalgamate the gold, to get it out. And we were starting already at that time to see issues of motricity in young children who grew up along rivers and who were eating contaminated fish. There was a campaign to try and get some of these people to not eat certain types of fish or eat smaller fish that tended to stock less mercury in. which is difficult. Some of these people were refugees. They were basically subsistence, trying to get them to throw back an enormous fish into the water was a challenge. So a lot of that information and the articles cited in the book are all related to the laboratory where we were staying in French Guiana. So.
And was that important to you to raise awareness about this particular issue in this particular part of the world as well with your book? Was that also a goal that you had in writing it?
It was because I'm American, grew up in the United States. And one of the things that kind of fascinated me is we would go to French Guiana. And then if I were to go back to the United States, especially in my family, a little less around my husband and his friends who were mostly academics and other situations. And many times people didn't know where French Guiana was and weren't aware of what was going on. I think if you were to talk, for example, about Brazil and issues about deforestation and other things going on in Brazil, most people would say, oh yeah, I've heard of that. And in the United States, it struck me as not being the case. And so I felt it was really almost incumbent upon me to try and write something and get it published in the United States about these issues. Most French people in metropolitan France are aware of it. It gets talked about, it's on the news, it's in the papers. Unfortunately, recently, a young gendarme was killed in the forest, going in with his unit to destroy a gold mining site. And one of the workers shot him and killed him. So it's a real issue, and it's been an issue for a long time. And it's obviously a difficult problem because I don't think there's any really good solution. But I felt that as an English-speaking person, as someone who grew up in the States, it was really kind of my duty to try and get something out there and make this, more well-known, especially in the United States.
Yeah. Have you been back to see how much it has changed recently?
To French Guiana?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, for personal reasons, dealing with my husband's health situation, I haven't been back.
Okay.
But from being in contact with people who are still at the laboratory, there are other friends who still live there. And obviously from this news report, I don't think it's gotten any better. And I don't know how they can really improve the situation, especially with the illegal mining. It's very hard to control. The borders are rivers, they're very porous. People whom I've crossed in the forest, walking along in the forest, are, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they're in a desperate situation and willing to take a lot of risks to try and get the gold out. So
yeah. And have you had feedback from readers that shows you that you have raised some awareness and you have communicated a lot about the state of things in that area of the world? Have you had any interactions with readers?
I have mostly friends who've written to me and said, wow, they got kind of caught up in the story, which was good, but also said that they had learned a lot about the situation. So that was one of the goals.
So you've achieved it. You achieved what you set out to do with your book.
Well, I had a second goal, but I don't know if this is the time to talk about it.
Perhaps. Yeah, for sure. What was your other goal?
Well, the other goal was, after luckily, having had the opportunity to spend time in the rainforest with my husband and his colleagues, I started getting really impatient when I would read fiction, especially that took place, especially in the rainforest. And you couldn't get to page 10 before someone got bitten by a snake or got something horrible happening to them. And, or even talking to people and saying that we spend a lot of time in the forest. And of course, the reaction is always, oh my gosh, aren't you afraid? Which is normal. I mean, it's part of our culture. It's part of our oral tradition. This goes way back. But I know from experience, and like I made Paulie say in the book, you need to be careful, but you don't need to be afraid. So I really wanted to write a novel where it was almost the only place she felt comfortable. And
Mhm.
I was a little bit worried at the beginning about people not believing about a woman going off into the rainforest by herself and spending the night. But I know many women who do that. I know many people who do that. And so I felt pretty sure that it was something that could be believable. I really wanted her to be there, and this is where she felt the best. And in fact, the only real threat to her wouldn't come from the animal world, you know. And I felt that that was important to have the kind of counterbalance to a piece of literature that took place in the rainforest.
Absolutely. I mean, we see it so often that nature in all its forms is kind of demonized, right? You have to be afraid of it, and there's something out there that's out to get you and hunting
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
and all of these things. And sure, a healthy respect of nature is necessary. You know, you're stepping into a world that, you know, we're not so well adapted for anymore.
No, no.
um so a healthy respect is always needed, but fear makes us do weird things as
Hmm.
as humans, and encouraging fear is not usually helpful. So
Hmm.
I did appreciate that as well.
Hmm.
And that the yeah, like you say, the things she had to be most afraid of were other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit more about Polly, because um, you said it in your summary of the book that she's a funny character, right? She does kind of grow up during this book, in that she's a slightly unlikable protagonist in the first bit, because she's not so sure of herself. She's a bit selfish. She's always making decisions that are
Yeah,
questionable,
not so fair.
and kind of, yeah, very focused on her own actions, rather than um maybe how those actions affect anybody else. But as you go through the story, and she does look outward, um you see her start to change, and I really appreciated that.
Mm.
Did you intentionally make her have that kind of character arc? Did you intentionally characterize her as, not immediately likable?
I wanted at the beginning, for purposes of the narrative, to make her an unreliable narrator. I
Okay.
wanted us not, because I had to do with some of the enigma of trying to figure out what's going on. And if we weren't sure we can trust her, she wasn't sure she could trust herself, I thought it might be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably one of the basic tenets of literature that characters develop throughout the course of it. And the risk with Polly is, as you said, she's not particularly likable. So that maybe some people would say, I don't care. So I hope that by showing a little bit of her humanity, a little bit of her vulnerability, that what people would say, okay, I'm going to give her a chance and see if she can, change how she is. In one of the very early incarnations of the book, because I've written it so many times, I gave it to a friend to read, and I think she was worried that she would insult me, but she said to me, I kept on thinking, I wish she would get her act together. And and I thought, yes, that's exactly. I want someone to not dismiss her and say, okay, let's hope she's going to get her act together. So it was kind of a narrative technique for the most part. But
Yeah. And I think for me, pulling off of my experience in academia as well, in her first few trips into the forest, and she talks about her professor. Her professor is everything I hate about academia. I hate, it drives me nuts. It drives me absolutely crazy.
well, then
And
I'm,
when she's like sending him all these moths, and he's like, well, there are far too many of those moths to be there because it's not degraded. So I don't trust your collection skills. And I was like,
yes.
oh, and I think I found a connection. We bonded over our shared hate of this professor. um and I was also just waiting for her to like show him up, that he would eventually have to be like, "Mm, okay, you're right."
But
Someone at that moment.
it's funny because one of the tenets, I'm very old school about writing, but one of the tenets of apparently good writing and good literature is there are no villains. And he's about as close as we come to a villain, because I think if you can see everyone's motivation in the story and you can at least understand it, if not agree with it, then it makes the texture of the story much richer. But he was really just borderline yuck. And in fact, I had sent it off to various places, and I think we'll get into that later. And someone actually wanted him to be more villainous and take a greater role in the story. But for me, he was a minor character, and he was just kind of a foil in something. But I'm glad you felt that way, because I've been around a lot of academics, and he was.
I have too. And it's, when they're like, oh, when you say he's the closer we get to a villain, and I'm like, yeah, but he's not, fiction, like he's not completely out of the realm of possibility. I've met many who fit him quite well. So it's, yeah. Oh, he really got under my skin. Even a side character, and he got so far under my skin, and so it worked. Whatever you wanted to achieve with that character, it works.
Yes. Well, but she does kind of evolve towards her feelings about him too, and gets a certain amount of justice.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was satisfied.
Good. I'm glad.
In terms of the science, I mean, you said you wrote the book because you were already in this environment where people were researching it, and you were translating an abstract for a paper and everything. How did you decide how much science to put into it? Because there is a line, right, where you're still writing fiction and you still want the story to speak for itself, but then you want the science to be interesting and you want people to learn something a little bit. So, there's a balance you have to hit. How did you decide how much science was enough, but not too much?
Well, there is a balance, and it's a difficult balance for someone like me because I'm not a scientist. And I still have nights where I wake up and I think, I wonder if I said something stupid. Because I'm around scientists, and I know that even for other readers, if you read something and you know better, it ruins the story for you. But I felt like I needed I tried to find the balance between a certain amount of science, plus it's in an environment that a lot of people don't know. There's a mixture of language and characters, and vocabulary that you kind of need to learn, and all of that stuff. So I think I tried to use as much science as I felt comfortable with as a layperson, if you will, so that I could kind of stick to my story, make people interested, but not say something totally wrong, and at that point lose people who may otherwise be interested in the story. I'm still not convinced that I didn't say something stupid, but I really spent a lot of time trying to verify and make sure that I hadn't gone over the line. And then, as you said, you want people to be interested in the science, you want them to pay attention to things, but you're telling a story and it needs to move forward. And if you get too bogged down in things, it just stops it. So there are scientific papers for people who want to.
If you want more science, go read a journal.
Scientific papers for that. I have translated many of them.
It's a very different pace, a very different feel from reading a scientific paper to reading a story that's supposed to teach you some science. And I switch between the two because I also try and write things that teach people something. And so I use very different language than I would if I was writing an academic paper. And now when I write an academic paper, I'm like, God, this is boring. I wish I could write the way that I write my other stuff.
Yeah, but it's different because I have spent a lot of time proofreading and translating academic papers. You need to get the information across, and you need to get it across as clearly as possible. And there's a format for it. You have the abstract introduction, material and methods, results, and so it leads you along. I've worked with a lot of people saying, you're not here to write literature, you're here to present your findings, and it needs to be as clear as possible. The problem I find is that people mix things up and they give results in the discussion and they give the discussion in the introduction, and I have to go back and say, there's a flow to it, so it's a whole different thing. But I think it helped me as a writer. I don't do it anymore because I was spending a lot of time correcting and translating things and less time on writing, but it did teach me about a certain amount of discipline, even in writing fiction, and going back over it again and back over it again and back over again to make sure that I've got out there what I wanted to say. So, and that's pretty basic, I think, as you know, in scientific articles. And people who have trouble, it's because they don't want to accept, I think, the fact that you need to go through it again, and you clean it up, and then you go through it again, and then you
So
clean
many
it up.
passes. So
Yeah.
many.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's true.
mm.
And in doing your research, in order to make sure that you got everything right, you included some of them in your bibliography, which again, I just really enjoy that you have one. And obviously your husband and his colleagues and the people you were working with there or around there would have been a great source of information. But so you probably looked at scientific articles for a lot of it. Did you find useful information anywhere else, other sources of information for your research?
Well, as you said, a lot of it was talking to people, being in country, thanks to the laboratory in country, being able to get out in the field. So a lot of it was from my own experience. And they were always so generous about saying, we're heading out, we're going upriver, come with us. We need an extra pair of
That's so
hands or
good.
something.
Some
Or heading
practical,
out,
hands-on experience to write from.
right.
That's great.
And some of the things that happen in the book I experienced, like when Polly is going to help pull nets and sticks her hands in the water, and Johan grabs her hand. He's like, don't do that. I did that. And the person in the boat with me was like, don't stick your hands in the net, So those kinds of things are very real. And so much, I would say much of the narrative and much of what happens is a story. I've either lived it or I've seen it or someone has told me about it. But because it was often having to do with environment or indicator species, I felt like I really needed to verify certain things. And then we're also dealing with people who have different languages. So I wanted to make sure I didn't say something stupid in one of the local languages. I spent hours going through pharmaceutical text about the use of plants.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the use of plants.
Yeah, and that kind of
Yes,
thing.
that
So
was fascinating.
I really was trying to use both my own experience and when I felt like, oh, I wonder if I got this right, which happened a lot. I thought I need to make sure for my own self that I haven't said something stupid. And this is my great fear with this book and with other things I've written, is not to say something stupid. So
where did the that kind of Polly's focus on medicinal plants, where did that come from? Was somebody there studying them, or was that just an interest that you had?
well, one of the local people working at the laboratory, and who actually was someone who drove the boats, the pilot for the boats, was a Saramaccan. And every once in a while, because he knows that I love to be on the water and he loved to be in the forest, and would find some excuse to take me out. And he, just as out of a kindness and also for him, would sometimes be collecting plants. There's something in the book where she talks about an aphrodisiac. And that's also based on real experience, because I had gone out into the forest with him, upstream into the forest, and he started collecting bark. And when I asked him why he was doing that, he got very shy about trying to tell me what it was about. So some of it came from him, and that gave me the idea of someone going into the forest, or even the man, Philippe Serdon was his name, who worked on Sphinx moths, planted a yellow alamanda plant on site at the base camp to attract sphinx moth because it's one of their host plants. And in talking to him, I found out that it could be deadly, that it was a cathartic, and it could be used actually. So those kind of things, just I thought, okay, I actually have a master's degree in applied anthropology and have spent some time in various areas in the field. But I thought it would be a good thing for her to be able to study, and also dealing with issues of getting information from people, this whole thing that's very difficult when you're in anthropology, because you're getting information from people and what you're giving back to them, kind of things. And for my own reasons, I wanted to deal with that as well.
Yeah. So you could pull on your, I mean, you say you're not a scientist, but you are a researcher in a different field where you were for your master's. So you can pull on that. You can pull experience that you had into it to make it feel very real, and as though
I hope so.
As though it's very tactile.
So.
Yeah. So the book was sent to me by your publisher, Middle Creek Publishing, and which was very kind of them. And how did you go about getting your book published? Once you'd written it and you'd edited it many times and you'd rewritten it and all of these things, how did you decide where to go?
Well, part of submitting and editing of the book and rewriting it was a really long process. It probably took me more than 15 years, because I was kind of doing a scattershot submission process. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have the internet to be able to submit. And that the internet is a wonderful and a horrible thing when it comes to submissions. So I was just doing this kind of scattershot, as I said, submission process. And sometimes I get a little bit of feedback. In the interim, I had hired a professional company to read it. I had given it to friends. And every time it came back, I thought, it's not there yet. So over the process of this back and forth and people saying, no, you need to change this, or I finally got it to the point where I thought, maybe this works, after asking myself a lot of questions about what I was trying to do. And then I thought, I need to, this is very basic writer's advice, I need to focus my submissions research on people who are doing environmental books. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And a couple of them wrote back and said, this book's a mess, I don't want it. It is a lot of work, which was very painful. And I sent it off to Middle Creek, and David wrote back and he said, I love it, I'd like to publish it. And I can't thank him enough, because I was borderline thinking it's not going to find a home. And in fact, the truth of the matter was that it was a mess, and we spent a lot of time with him and a young woman named Amanda, another person named Kyle. I don't know them, never met them, going through it and cleaning it up, taking care of typos, grammatical errors, inconsistencies. Because I had written it so many times, there were even contradictions. And by the time I got to that point, I couldn't even look at the manuscript anymore. So
I know that feeling.
I really have to thank them, because she took a great leap of faith in taking on the work. It's a lot of work. I'm not sure he's gotten much return on it. An unknown author who lives in Europe. So it was really, I was really quite, and continue to be quite moved and quite humbled and thankful to him for all the work he put into it. And I think he put something out that looks good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess anytime anybody goes into the querying trenches, or the submission trenches is what they call it, because it is this kind of, it's almost like a fight with your self-doubt, right? When you get all of the feedback and it's painful, like you said, and you're like, do I continue? Do I keep, do I have enough confidence in this book to keep sending it out to people? And it really is about finding, whether you're looking for a publisher or an agent or whatever, it really is about finding that person who sees the potential in it in order to put in the work. because there's always more work you can do to it and always more edits you can do. So I'm glad that he saw the potential in the book when maybe other people didn't, and now they're, now they can see it out in the world, and I'm glad that it is out there.
Yes,
And
I am too, and thanks to him. Otherwise, it would be a pile of papers in the bottom of my drawer someplace with me thinking, oh well, it's not. I'm not going to find a home for it. So,
Are
but
you working on any other projects now?
I actually have another novel coming out next year. It's not an environmental book. It's a coming of age novel that I actually wrote before I wrote Sphinx. Put in a drawer, and then spent time working on Sphinx and other things like that. And when Sphinx came out, I thought, maybe I should see if I can find an editor. And to my immense surprise, I did. And she's going to start the editing process this weekend, so it should be out in 2024.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Is it so coming of age? Okay, so it's not with the same, with Middle Creek Publishing, it's with a different.
No, it isn't, because I really felt that he was, and I wrote to him to say, I have to thank you for so many things, but I don't think this book is right for you. It's not. It does deal with cartography. There's a great deal of information about cartography, but it's a coming of age novel set in the 1960s in the United States, and I didn't think it was appropriate for him. So I wrote to him and I said, I'm sending this out. It's tentatively been accepted, and I don't want you to feel as though I was ignoring you or I didn't appreciate everything you've done, but I don't think this book is right for you. And he wrote back and he said, no, I don't think so either. But I wanted to go the independent publishing route because I think it's important. So
Yeah, it's always, I mean, like you said, you search for a publisher in a niche, right? And then of course, if you're not going to write in that niche, then that's not the publisher for that story. So I'm glad that he also saw it that way.
yeah, I didn't want him to feel as though I had, abandoned him after all of the
No,
risks that he'd taken and everything that he had done and all the, work he had put into it. But I really continue to believe it's not the right, he's not the right publisher for it. So.
no. Well, yeah, well, all the best for
Thank you.
the release of that book next year. And that probably leads me on to my last question, which is where can people find out more about you and about your projects and keep on top of events like the release of books, and where can they find Sphinx?
They can find Sphinx at Middle Creek Publishing. They can find it on Amazon. I would love to tell you that I have a social media presence, but I don't. I have been trying to convince myself for a while that I need to put together an author website, and then I'm just uncomfortable with it for right now. Maybe with the publication of the second novel, I'll decide that it's time to do that. I don't know why, it just makes me uncomfortable. I would say that if people buy Sphinx from either Middle Creek or from Amazon, and they want to comment on it, especially if they like it. If they don't like it, they don't maybe need to say anything. But if they want to comment on it, maybe send something to David, because I really feel, he's so responsible for it being out there. It wouldn't be out there if it weren't for him. So until I decide to get a social media presence, maybe that would be the best way to do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed our discussion and conversation so much, and I enjoyed your book, Sphinx. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, because through you, I will have maybe a little bit more exposure to people who might pick up the book and then tell somebody else about it. So thank you very much for having me, and for all the good work you do.
Oh, well, I've had a wonderful time, and I will see you next week, ecofictologists. Wonderful.
Okay.
Perfect. That was great.
Yeah, the phone didn't ring either. So
the
that's
phone
great.
did not ring.
Well, thank you again for taking the time and kind of getting the word out. So
Yeah, absolutely. For your first, for someone who doesn't do this very often, you did very well. So no need to be nervous next time you have an interview.
Well, it helped that you sent the questions. So I did spend time going over them and thinking maybe a little bit about what I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah. Getting the
Mm.
questions ahead of time is always makes you feel a little calmer.
Well, it allowed me to kind of organize my thoughts a little bit, although I do tend to ramble. So
No,
maybe
no, it was great. You did not ramble.
I...
It was wonderful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you
And
very
I'll
much.
let you know when it goes out. I'll be putting it on YouTube, and then I'm planning on starting a podcast with all the content that I have on my YouTube channel. So it'll also be on a podcast, but I'll let you know when that happens.
You have subscriptions to your channel? I mean, is it something I can subscribe to? I'm really a nerd about this stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So the YouTube channel, you can subscribe to it, which is just that you get kind of a notification whenever I post something new. I haven't been posting that regularly on the YouTube channel recently for reasons. And but I'm hoping the with the launch of the podcast that I'll be making content a bit more regularly.
Yeah, I did
So
go on and look at some, watch some episodes and everything. So
yeah,
keep an eye out, see what you're up to.
yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thanks.
And we'll keep in touch.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.